To moderate this session, please join me in welcoming Mr. Dhananjay Singh, Head Engineering Delivery, National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI. A very good morning to you, sir. Pleasure having you here with us. Our speaker, please join me. Please join me in welcoming them. Our speaker, Ms. Shalini Warrier, Executive Director and Business Head, Retail Federal Bank Limited. A very good morning to you, ma'am. Mr. Arjun Chowdhry, Group Executive, Affluent Banking, NRI, Cards, Payment and Retail Lending, Axis Bank. Well, he will be joining us in next couple of minutes. Our third speaker, Mr. Ripunjai Gaur, Chief Business Officer, Paytm. Let's give a huge round of applause and welcome him. So very good morning to you. Looking forward for the first session. All the best to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I think we still have one of our panel members stuck in the traffic. So I also had the same experience. I think more than roads, even the footpaths are also quite busy. So most of the people are getting down from the cars and just walking down, right? So I good to see on the day one the kind of houseful we have today. And I would say even the topics are also timely. The topic today we have is scaling up offline payments, especially the UPI LiteX and the NCMC-OTG experience, right? So we have the panel members today. Shalini and Ripunjai. So most of the panel members we have had spent already more than 2-3 decades in the industry. So we would like to utilize their time and the experience they had in the industry, especially their views in how ecosystem can scale up, right? So if before I start, I think it's timely and critical as well, because if we see in the digital world, having the transaction seamlessly, especially in the areas where the connectivity is limited, or I would say even not there, even the areas, let's say if you go to Tibet and even the Northeast where the connectivity is very low, right? Having the ability to do transactions seamlessly, I think it's a great game changer with the help of these offline solutions which have been there. And apart from that, I think the kind of innovation which has been done in this area, especially it's not just technology innovation, I would say it's more of a ecosystem elevation which has been done by the financial ecosystems to achieve the offline payments. So today what we will do is maybe we'll have Q&A sessions towards the end, and good to see the diverse set of the audience here. I warm welcome all and each and everyone in the panel members today. I think what we will cover today is how the offline payment is scaling across the industry. What are the challenges we have even achieving given the challenges of infra and everything which we have in hand, and what are the potential these solutions have in future. Maybe today we are talking about UPI LiteX and even the NCMC going forward, there might be more innovations in the same directions, right? So we'll try to cover these aspects and obviously open for all the questions which we have. So we'll start with Shalini. So Shalini, as per you, and I think you have seen the industry for many decades, I would say. You might have seen a lot of innovations and transformation programs kicking up, even scaling up, not kicking up and scaling up, right? So based on your observation and your experience, what do you see, especially these offline payments, what ecosystem has to do or collaborate to scale up these offline solutions?
Thanks, Dhananjay. Good morning, everybody. Such a pleasure to be here at GFF, having been here, I think, for the last 3 years at least in a row. The scale and size is truly impressive, and for any of you coming here for the first time, don't be daunted by it. I think there are many, many sessions that you can attend which are very good. So great to be here, and thank you very much for your time and attention. So let me turn to kind of the topic, and for the benefit of everybody, I'm sure you guys know, but it's sometimes good to kind of reiterate. Both the solutions we're talking of today, LiteX and NCMC, are very, very well positioned for the Indian ecosystem that we are in. LiteX is kind of a upgrade to the UPI Lite itself, which has a whole lot of benefits, and LiteX gives us a lot more benefits beyond that. Both these, therefore, have been launched with great attention to what is needed for the Indian ecosystem. Specifically, Dhananjay, to your question, where are we and how do we make sure we scale it up? LiteX was launched last year, and I think there is still room for improvement. And as industry, many things that we can do collectively as the industry. India's digital kind of revolution has been mainly driven by factors such as, interoperability, collaboration, the public platforms provided by entities like RBI Edge, NPCI, MeitY, etc. So we really got to the stage with that kind of collaboration. How do we now take these specific things forward, the LiteX and the NCMC? So three things that I believe as an industry we need to do. The first thing, in my view, is a lot more of user education and awareness. India is a very diverse country, as we know, spread across the length and breadth of the country. I don't think users even now understand and appreciate the benefits that come from UPI Lite, for example, LiteX, or even NCMC. UPI itself has become very prominent, no doubt about it, but UPI, LiteX, etc. needs a little more on user education, and no one entity can do that user education because federal banks' reach, for example, will be a certain bit. Paytm will have a certain reach. HDFC Bank will have a certain reach. How do we as an industry come together to increase the user collaboration, user awareness, user education of what these capabilities are and how they help is one area. And I have a practical example. I was on a holiday recently in Kashmir, and to be fair, UPI was known, but to get them to understand UPI Lite or LiteX was not easy. It took time. So I think user education awareness is really something we need to work on. The second is, and it's linked in some form to user education awareness, as an industry, we need to be a lot more conscious and focused on what I call complaint resolution or dispute resolution. Why do I put that up in the hierarchy? It's practical human experience that if you face an issue one time and it takes time to resolve, the change that needs to be done to bring you back onto that platform as a user is very mind-bogglingly difficult. So how do we make sure that as an industry we work on user dispute resolution from a quality, timeliness perspective so that when an issue happens, it's resolved so quickly that the consumer doesn't feel the need to go back to his old ways of working. That's the second area. The third is clearly on infrastructure itself. The last mile infrastructure is still a challenge in many, many places. While we've made huge progress as a nation and as an industry, there's still lots more that needs to be done and get to that stage where, things like, and I think we'll explore them a little later, like 5G, IoT, etc. We'll explore. So many things that we can do, but if I were to focus on three things that we can come together as an industry, it would be user education and awareness, dispute resolution, and infra development.
Thanks, Shalini. So I think, I agree. In fact, the user education is very important. But I would say even based on our experience, which I've seen, even the UPI Lite, the success rate is 99.99%, right? So compared to the typical UPI success rate, even the technical declines are somewhere in the range of 1 to 2%. But UPI Lite success rate is somewhere around 99.99%. So I think making customers aware that you will have a better experience and the better success rate, I think a lot of awareness is required, especially infra side. Anyways, we'll explore. So I'll come to Ripunjai. Thanks for coming. And Ripunjai, I think based on, anyways, you are very well involved in the same area, offline and all. So based on your experience, what do you see if, let's say, this has a rapid growth going forward in terms of offline payments? What are the challenges and risks do you foresee, especially on the security and fraud side?
So, thank you, Dhananjay, for inviting us. And from last 3 years, I have been a regular visitor to GFF. And every time I see a bigger scale than the last time. And I think this time the scale is very phenomenal. And thank you, audience, for joining this. In spite of all the traffic we have, I think we have a full house, which shows that the people are participating and people wanted to be associated with events like GFF in India. So to answer your question, there are 3-4 major challenges which we see, especially in a scenario where the connectivity is low because LiteX or NCMC card, OTG card, which is there. These are more prevalent in areas where the connectivity is a challenge. So when the connectivity is a challenge, first of all, the risk of fraudulent transaction is there because verification is not possible on the go. The merchant is also offline, the consumer is also sometimes facing a connectivity challenge. So there can be a scenario where the fraudulent transactions can happen. Second, since there is a scenario which is data breach because since the connectivity is not proper, a lot of data may reside locally. So one of the challenge which we see is there are scenarios in which especially on the merchant side, the data is pulled out of the systems, whether it is a POS machine or whether it is some other device which he is using. And the third and the important is the delayed reconciliation. As you know, in a financial transaction, it is a two-way authentication. The person who is sending the money has to be very well sure that the money has been received. And the second is the person who is getting the money has to be very well sure that the money has come to us. So in the transactions where the connectivity is not proper or up to the mark, sometimes it happens there's a delayed transaction scenario. And the fourth and the important challenge which we see is device security. Because you understand the device, whether it is POS terminal, whether it is a device like a soundbox or a tap and pay, is now going to masses. And especially in the areas where we have to store local data, if the encryption is not in a proper way or we are not doubly sure about the encryption, there can be scenarios where someone can hack a device locally and use it to that. So those are the challenges which we see while expanding it to the rural markets and the new geographies in India.
Thanks, Ripunjai. So I think very well pointed. I think reconciliation is an issue. I think that's where I think even from the regulatory point of view, the amount for light transactions were slightly on the lower side, so that at least even if there are frauds, the impact radius is slightly low. And I think, so I'll come back to Shalini. So like you mentioned, IoT and all, right? So how do you foresee these offline payments, let's say next 5 to 10 years, looking at the pace the IoT and 5Gs are coming up and taking up a lot of scale in India?
So if you go back in time to the last 5 years to where we are now, there's been such a huge advancement, right? I think 5 years back, UPI was probably not even a word in our dictionary, but today I don't think we survive without that. So my view of the future, therefore, is things like IoT, 5G are going to be hugely beneficial triggers for the development of more robust and reliable payment systems for a country like India. And why do I say that? First of all, I think if you look at it, the variety of IoT payments are going to go up materially. Today, I think all of us talk about wearables, etc. But tomorrow, I'm sure there'll be other ways and means by which IoT can be done. So the innovation that is happening in that area is only going to enhance the reach of consumers for payment methodologies that are dependent on IoT. When you come to things like 5G, obviously we're very, very dependent on connectivity in a country like ours, and therefore 5G will help us. In terms of advancing the agenda for connectivity, advancing the agenda for customers' access to these funds. So my view is in 5 years from now, these payment systems will be much, much more prevalent, will be much, much more kind of advanced in its capabilities, advanced in its functionalities, and will look and feel as if they were just part of our natural DNA. So we've got to. Having to get to that, however, we'll need we've spoken about a few of them like user education, etc. And we'll also need a fair amount of, my view, regulatory support and government support, both of which the industry has benefited from in terms of, payment values, for example, or as Ripunjai was saying, the dispute resolution. But we'll have to do much more in that area if we want to increase the reach of these payments, Dhananjay.
Thanks, Shalini. So I would say, Ripunjai, you have any views on this, especially the 5G and IoT space in future? Especially if I see the Paytm, right, the soundbox, I think was, I would say, one of the good innovation, especially the audio confirmation where...
It solved reconciliation problem.
Yeah, right. So especially on IoT and 5G, how do you see next 5 to 10 years, especially based on your last experience at Paytm?
Yeah. So IoT technology is evolving and evolving at a very fast pace in India because at one point of time, if you have to connect client and server, you required a particular kind of bandwidth. With IoT programming becoming more light, the apps becoming more light on the client side, the requirement and the memory size is becoming lesser and lesser, and the data side requirements are becoming lesser and lesser. So what it practically means when the client-side apps become less consuming in the bandwidth or the memory size of the particular device which is kept there, it means the device become affordable. And when the device become affordable, it is the mass adoption will start. So that is one thing which Indian fintech companies, especially Paytm, is working on, that how can we make our IoT devices not just robust but also affordable. Because when a consumer or a merchant starts the journey on the digital transaction, on the day one, he's very skeptical. And especially a person who has never experienced a digital transaction is very skeptical. So he's not ready to invest in a high quality device or a high priced device, I must say. So the device has to be, the entry barrier of an IoT device has to be very low. So that is where the IoT technology is evolving. The second is, the second technological advantage, which is because when we talk about India, we have close to 2 lakh pin codes across India, or more than that. So the device has to be robust and steady. If we are providing a device at an IoT level or the technology is not sustainable to a rough use in an Indian kind of a market where there are all kind of scenarios, there are dust, there are rains. So those kind of scenarios where the technology people are working on, so the device become more robust. And the third and important is how the localization of these IoT platform can happen. When I say localization, the voice is one of the medium. So the IoT should combine with the local language and able to support with, because India has like 14, 15 major languages and then another 25 languages which are not, I must call not major language, but a regional language kind of a scenario, where the IoT platform should be able to support those languages if the payment reconciliation problem has to be solved.
Sure. Thanks, Ripunjai. So I think just to add, I think, so like you mentioned Soundbox, right? Other players also came in picture, right? So how do you feel even the space of offline payments going forward down the line industry, how the entire ecosystem should collaborate to just make this offline payment successful?
So I'm sure India is the best example where regulator, governing bodies, and all fintech players have come together to scale the digitalization of the merchant, especially on the merchant side, since the Soundbox is the question which you're asking. But there are further needs in terms of if we can have more collaborated, if banks and fintechs can come, because banks have a wider reach in terms of rural after the bank account opening scheme by government. They have a wider reach. If we can collaborate where the technology players can collaborate with banks and give a comfort to the person who is first time adoption on a technology, I think we will see that India progressing at a much faster rate.
Sure. So, Shalini, I'm just trying to understand, let's say while all this will happen, maybe to both of you, right? So what are your views, like how the success of offline payment or the key metrics, if you have in mind as an ecosystem, people should be tracking?
Great. Before I answer that question, maybe we can ask for a show of hands over here. The audience seems a little quiet, Dhananjay. So let me just check. How many in the audience, by a show of hands, can tell me you've used UPI Lite in the last 30 days? In the last 30 days. UPI Lite. Not bad. That's sounding good.
Small payments.
Yeah, UPI Lite has obviously started its journey pretty well. UPI LiteX, maybe Mumbai doesn't need to use LiteX, but when you traveled to any remote places, have any of you used UPI LiteX? Good. Okay. Tried using it but couldn't use it. And NCMC-OTG, on the go? NCMC on the go, obviously all car driving audience is what I think we have. We don't have metros.
I think Delhi and Hyderabad will have more people.
Delhi, Hyderabad will probably have more NCMC on the go.
So not just MCMC card, in fact, these OTG devices,
OTG
so I think
devices.
from the NPCI sort.
Yeah, Federal Bank, for example, has a device like a keychain called Flash Pay, which we launched with NPCI's great support. And yes, adoption has started, but you're right. I've seen it more, as you said, in metro-heavy places. But just that was an aside to just see what the audience thinks. So the metrics, therefore, I'm deriving from that as to what the metrics would look like for success. I think all of us in India are proud of what we have done with UPI, right? All of us have played a role in some form and fashion to make sure UPI is the go-to standard for payments. How do we then work on that as the basis to kind of work on some of the other payment systems that we have? And for me, the metrics of success, there are many, many metrics, but the overarching ones will be obviously the basic ones. How many users are there? What's the kind of value and volume of transactions they're doing? The repeat volume and value of transactions. The declines that are happening because that increases confidence levels, the timeliness for dispute resolution. So there are about 5 or 6 of these metrics, Dhananjay. But if I were to step back a little bit and look at it more from a customer satisfaction perspective, if I were to look at it more from a customer delight perspective, the one metric that we should be doing, and NPCI has now been working with us to do it for some of the other payment systems like IMPS, UPI, RuPay Debit, RuPay Credit, and at some point we will do UPI LiteX, this whole metric of NPS. Are you willing and able to recommend a UPI LiteX or an NCMC-OTG to your family and friend? On a scale of 1 to 10, please tell us, are you likely to recommend it or not likely to recommend it? And then you arrive at an NPS. A product level NPS is now measured by all banks with NPCI for UPI, IMPS, RuPay Debit, RuPay Credit. We should be, shortly when the volumes go up, add UPI Lite, LiteX, NCMC to that. That one metric, in my view, is an overarching metric which encapsulates all the other metrics that you can think of, because you would not be willing to recommend it to a family or a friend unless you were very convinced that it is serving the utility for which it is. So I would denote customer metric in that one NPS metric, and we should get to that stage, I'm sure, with NPCI very shortly.
Sure. Thanks, Shalini. You had something.
So in terms of metrics, we know that NPCI regularly publishes number. We have more than 5 billion transactions now happening on a monthly basis. But the true, as we mentioned in the earlier stage of the discussion, the true metrics is when you go to a shop and you see a board, no, we don't take cash. So more number of those shops is a true identification now that the digitalization have received, and that kind of an adoption where the merchant does not feel that he will lose the sale or he will lose the some kind of a profit by moving 100% digital. So, and we have seen this in across India, at least in top 10 towns, there will be no shop who does not take digital transactions. Some may be reluctant at this point of time, and some may be very eager to take digital transactions instead of cash. But in next 3 to 4 years, I'm pretty confident that at least in 300 to 400 cities across India, there cannot be a shop which does not take digital transaction. So that will be the true metrics, and then the stage will come that we don't take cash.
True, I think, yeah, that makes sense, because I think ground reality is more important than the metrics on the Excel sheet, right? So I think, I'm not sure how we are doing at time, but I would like to ask one more question, Ripunjai, is based on your field experience, especially if we have to take it to the scale, right? So what are the infra level changes required, maybe from the government bodies, or even if you say from the ecosystem level, right, where especially for the remote areas and the underserved area where the connectivities are not there, infra is not there. So what do you feel based on your past experience? Yeah.
So there are two kinds of support which fintech players like Paytm requires. One is the network side, more the network expands, more is the connectivity of people expands, and more is the connectivity of IoT device expands, because ultimately we can tame a transaction in offline, but someday or other we have to have that reconciled with some server sitting at some city. So that is one thing. If 5G gets rolled out, then we can have more number of devices and different kind of devices, like facial recognition. I think RBI recently released some guidelines but that currently faces data bandwidth issues. But if we can have a 5G rollout at a mass level, then those issues get solved and the payments will become more secure. And the second is that India starts manufacturing devices, especially IoT devices, at a large scale. Today, sound boxes are getting manufactured, but POS devices are still coming from our neighboring country. So if we can have that kind of infrastructure where we can manufacture IoT devices in-house, that will boost the transaction digitalization furthermore.
Yeah, thanks, Ripunjai. So, Shalini, one thing on the fraud and risk side, especially because when we talk about offline, right? So, the chances of customers not adopting, especially is how do I know whether the status will get updated, the frauds are not there, the device gets into wrong hands, right? So, what are your views on, especially on the user adoption side and the customer education and all those things, awareness, and how do we make sure these myths go away and people adopt it, especially from the security and risk point of view?
Sure. First, the responsibility really is on the provider of the capability, like the banks, and along with NPCI and others, to ensure that they have invested enough in adequate security measures to prevent potential frauds. While I know we cannot prevent them completely, at least reduce the risk of mitigation of the frauds that happen because of cyber security issues. So things like store and forward, tokenization, encryption, caching, all these things have to be invested in to make sure that the underlying capability is well. And NPCI, we work extensively, as you know, with NPCI, all banks do, and the common library, etc., really helps on that. So that's one part of it, which is non-negotiable. It's necessary, but as I say, it's not sufficient. The other part of it is where we started this conversation, which is all around user education and awareness. If you see if you dissect most of the frauds that happen in the country, Dhananjay, and there are many of them that happen in the cyberspace, you can attribute a very large part of them to actually user lack of awareness on the part of the user, or to some extent negligence on the part of the user, inadvertent in times, sometimes advertent, but inadvertent also. So I think the tempo on user education and awareness has to be materially higher than what it is today. We've all done a lot of work. Individual banks are doing it. Collectively, we're doing it. But how do we make it more and more robust, more and more secure, and more aware, customers becoming more and more aware of their own responsibilities in this regard. So between the security measures that the bank takes and the user education and awareness to make sure that they understand that they're not compromised will help a lot. Again, some of the measures that RBI is coming out with, for example, there are draft guidelines out right now on other factors of authentication than OTP, because an OTP tends to be the most common form of authentication, but also the most misused form of authentication. So how do you move beyond that to other forms of authentication is one measure. The fact that we're starting payments with a small amount, like you said, so God forbid if something goes wrong, at least the risk is lowered to that extent is another measure. The banks are investing extensively in what is called monitoring technology at the back end. So we, for example, in Federal Bank do have capabilities that monitor repeat transactions of the same value within a short span of time. What is the velocity of the transactions? If a person has been used to doing one transaction a month but is suddenly doing 3 or 4 transactions a day, we have triggers to say we'll call up. So there is no one silver bullet that will answer this question, but between banks investing in the right capabilities for it, user education awareness, regulatory interventions, we will get this right.
Thanks, Shalini. So I'm sure, as you mentioned about the fraud rules and all, so we do have exhaustive solution EFRM at NPCI. So I'm sure Mahfouz or somebody is already sitting here in this room, Nasir. So these rules, I think there are hundreds of rules which takes care of the anomaly patterns and all. And I think, like you mentioned, especially on the fraud side, right? There are multiple angles to it. There was some thought which I was thinking, especially from the regulatory point of view and all those things, there's a lot of governance which comes in. I think that also helps. And I think devices-wise, I think there are multiple devices in the market where I think authenticity of these devices is also a question mark. And I think if those are taken care by the service providers, I think that makes sense. So I think time-wise, we can see the clock getting into the red color. So I think if we can take some questions, if some of the guests have to any of the panel members, we'll then take it from there.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Aman and I'm a consultant with Cardni. I have a question. So all of the things that you recommended, Shalini ma'am, with regards to awareness, and we also spoke about the instances of fraud being high, dispute resolution needs to be on point. So a lot of money will be required for all of this. So what is your vision on monetization? Like, how will the monetization impact adoption?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, the banks, all banks, and are investing extensively in exactly the points you mentioned. User education, dispute resolution, infrastructure, fraud prevention, monitoring techniques, etc. I'll split this into two parts. One, there is clearly a need for industry-level support from the industry-wide support from the government to make sure we continue investing, and the government's been doing that over the last couple of years. MeitY, as is can be seen here, has been helping banks with some level of infrastructure support that is provided, some level of financial support that is provided. That continues to be there. The second part of it is at some stage these will have to start becoming self-sustaining, because I don't think we can very long depend just on on subsidies or kind of incentives from the government. To make it self-sustaining, there has to be a recognition of the fact that the parties will have to pay, because for the sheer convenience and UPI gives us, beyond a point in time, I don't think it can continue to remain free. That's my view. We will have to start looking at some payment. The payment doesn't need to be very large, because it's got to be, commensurate with what the traffic can bear. So that's the second part of it, and that will happen, in my view, over the course of the period of time. The third part of it is our belief, Federal Bank's belief has been, and it's proved by data, that if you provide the customer these payment technologies and payment capabilities and create the stickiness that is required, naturally the business will go up and the volumes will go up, and its direct correlation to the bread and butter of banks, CASA, is very, very clear. So it's a three-pronged strategy to make sure this becomes profitable for banks. Infrastructure support from the government, making it in some form and fashion chargeable in the future, and creating stickiness so that CASA balances will go up. These are the three-pronged attack. It's not going to happen overnight, but banks are working with the regulators on that.
Yeah, and just to add what Shalini is saying is that even if in the current scenario, that investment which is needed is lesser than the loss which banks or fintechs are facing because of the fraud. As Shalini mentioned, in Indian context, maintaining a customer is very important, because longevity gives a more LTV, or a lifetime value of a customer. And if the customer faces a fraud, most of the time the burnt is beared by either a bank or a fintech, especially if it is not customer fault. So if somebody has shared an OTP, then there is nothing which anybody can do. But if there is a fraud which has happened due to somebody hacking a device or somebody misutilizing a card, that burnt is taken by either an acquirer or an issuer. So it is in the interest of both acquirer and issuer and banks and fintechs to work on this technology, and I don't see there is any hitch about that. But as we know, the fraudsters also become smarter and smarter. So it is not the fintech players or banks has to solve. The ecosystem has to solve it. So ecosystem include a telecom provider who gives a SIM without authentication, and the call comes from that SIM. Then ecosystem is like what TRI has done, that you cannot put unregistered link on an SMS. Or a mass SMS broadcast cannot happen from an unregistered link. So those kind of ecosystem which are more of an hygiene will also bring a lot of security and control a lot of frauds.
I think, Ripunjai, like you mentioned, right? So I think the payment is the last leg in the fraud. I think social engineering frauds has already happened, where most of the users get trapped in the if you like some of the YouTube channel, you get 50 rupees, then they drag you into the Bitcoin trading and all, then there is no way back to get the money. So those are social fraud. The fraud and the user is already trapped. The mode of payment, like somebody says, I was trapped in a UPI fraud. Actually, it's not a UPI fraud. It's like you are already trapped in a social engineering fraud. UPI is just mode of payment. Another thing which on the fraud side, I think I've seen multiple players have started looking or exploring is the distributed authentication, which is like more or less based on the blockchain based mechanism where your authentication is not centralized. Whenever even you log in, there are even a lot of players who have their patents where by the time you log in, it's your authentication data is distributed across multiple servers, so nobody can hack it. Right? There are multiple ways people are exploring, especially on the fraud side. Yeah, I think yeah, we are on time. If somebody has any question from the panel member, I think we can take one more if anybody has. Yeah.
I can see one hand raised over there. If somebody can get a mic across to him. Thank you.
So, hi everyone, I am Piyush from ICICI Bank. Actually, I want to know how safe is UPI Lite and UPI LiteX, because there's no two-factor authentication, just user will log in and they can make transactions.
So I think you are right that while doing a transaction, it is not an authentication is not there. But while enabling the feature, the authentication is there. And I'm sure most of us know that UPI works with device binding. I think that is the most important thing in terms of if we talk about the frauds which have happened previously, they are now to a very large extent controlled because the device binding has been introduced by NPCI. And there are various other checks we are all the go. So if you talk about that, okay, there is no PIN, that's right. But before you enable the UPI Lite, there are a lot of checks which happen. And those checks are able to control that. And that is an example. If you see the number of frauds getting reported from UPI Lite, or I think Dhananjay can comment, but it's very, very low.
We have not seen, in fact, as of now, I think it's very negligible. That's why I was saying the success rate itself is 99.99%, which is like, I think even if I say talk about your data, it's also in 0 or 1 transactions.
And the payment values being very low, honestly, I don't know whether the cost-benefit trade-off for a fraudster, right? At the end of the day, he also does some cost-benefit analysis in his mind, I'm sure. So the values are pretty low in this, and which is fair, which is because that covers by the 80-20 rule. In fact, I think 99% rule, 99% of our transactions are below that value. I think the benefits far outweigh the thing, and as Ripunjai said, the risks have been mitigated by many controls that are put at the point of At the point of the transaction, you're right, there may not be a PIN, but what you do before that secures the transaction quite well. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. As Dhananjay says, the frauds on UPI Lite are virtually, touchwood, non-existent, you know.
In fact, I have to add, right, so even if you shift your device from Android to iOS, let's say, for example, if you're using any app, be it PhonePe, UPI, Beam, or anything, or even Paytm, right? So the moment you switch to the different iOS, let's say Android to iOS, you can't use Paytm or UPI Lite or Beam Lite or anything just by default, because the system itself will not allow. First, you have to go back to the previous app, previous device, deregister UPI Lite, and then come back here and do a device binding again, right? So it's not allowed. So the chances of somebody misusing is also very less.
Hello? Like you said, if a customer is moving from Android to iOS, in that case, he has to go back to his previous device and deregister UPI Lite. So in case if customer is not having an old device now with him, maybe he's lost his device, can this feature be there in the new device? He'll click, there will be some option kind of he'll deregister from his old device from the new device.
So there are ways where customer reaches out to the bank, and then there are a lot of options which banks provide. But generally, people before shifting their device, they generally do the migration.
There's a device change SOP which has been rolled out various players. And that is absolutely essential because most of the time it happens that the device gets stolen and now the fraudster wants to use the SIM card in some other device because device is logged. So those checks have been put and there are SOPs which have been rolled out to mitigate consumer discomfort.
Good. I think with that, I can see the clock ticking deep red now. So thanks, everyone. I think thanks for making this day one session more interactive, and thanks to the panel members for making it happen. A lot of key takeaways, especially fraud side and even infra side, the awareness, even the collaboration side from the ecosystem. I think a lot of key takeaways, especially for me, and I'm sure guests in the room also have some of the key takeaways, and the panel members are available after the session as well for the discussions. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for making it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhananjay.